My name is Lucas. I'm 27, and if there's one thing I've learned about my family, it's that respect is always conditional. Growing up, I was the quiet kid, the one who never quite fit into the rowdy laughter at family barbecues or the sarcastic banter at reunions. My parents divorced when I was young, and I spent most of my teenage years bouncing between households, never really settling into the family unit that everyone else seemed to prize. Because of that, I was often seen as an outsider, someone they could poke fun at without much consequence. By the time my cousin Daniel's wedding rolled around, I had already built up armor against the little digs and insults. Or at least, I thought I had. The reception was being held in this huge event hall just outside the city, chandeliers glittering, waiters balancing trays of champagne, the whole 9 yards. Everyone was dressed to impress. I had gone out of my way to make sure I looked decent. Navy suit, freshly pressed shirt, shoes polished. For once, I thought maybe I wouldn't stick out like the odd one at the table. But families have a way of reminding you exactly where you stand. It was midway through dinner when it happened. The speeches had wrapped up, glasses were clinking, and conversations were buzzing all around. I was sitting at a long table near the dance floor, across from my Aunt Marjorie. Now, Marjorie has always had this sharpness to her. She's the kind of person who can turn a compliment into an insult before you've even realized what happened. Growing up, she never missed a chance to tell me how I should toughen up or be more like Daniel. Even as an adult, she found ways to undermine me at every gathering. As the music softened and the groom's father stood to toast, Marjorie leaned back in her chair, swirled her wine, and pointed at me. "Don't get too comfortable, Lucas," she said loud enough for our side of the room to hear. "This family will never respect you." The words hung in the air like smoke. There was a beat of silence, then laughter broke out around her. Not the whole room, just the cluster of relatives closest to her. The kind of laughter that cuts deeper because it isn't harmless amusement, it's agreement. My cousin Sarah covered her mouth to hide her smirk. My uncle shook his head with that smug, "She said what we were all thinking" expression. Even people I barely knew chuckled uncomfortably, as though it was safer to join in than to push back. I sat frozen, my fork halfway to my plate. My face flushed hot, and I could feel that familiar tightness in my chest, the one that always comes when you're humiliated in public, but you can't think of a single sharp retort fast enough. Every instinct screamed at me to shrink into my seat, to pretend it didn't matter. But it did. It always had. I forced a smile, but inside, I was seething. I thought, why me? Why always me? I'd worked hard to carve out a life for myself, finished school, held down a steady job, paid my own bills. Yet to them, I was still the awkward kid who never belonged. The laughter was still rippling when the groom's father, Mr. Bennett, stood from his table. He wasn't part of my side of the family. He was Daniel's new father-in-law. A tall man with a calm, commanding presence, he raised his glass. But instead of smiling politely like everyone expected, he set the glass down and fixed his gaze on Marjorie. The room quieted almost instantly. "Marjorie," he said, his voice low but carrying. That was uncalled for, especially tonight. I thought he'd leave it at that, just a mild reprimand to smooth things over. But then he paused, looked around at the faces now frozen in discomfort, and continued. "Since you've chosen to make this personal, perhaps it's time the family knew something personal about you." A ripple of confusion swept through the tables. Marjorie stiffened, her lips parting as if to interrupt, but Mr. Bennett raised a hand. "Do you really think you're in any position to talk about respect?" he asked. His voice wasn't angry, it was almost disappointed. "Because I know exactly what you did. And I don't think everyone here would be laughing if they knew." My heart started pounding. Around me, people exchanged nervous glances. Half the room seemed to lean forward unconsciously, like an audience sensing the start of a drama they hadn't paid for but couldn't turn away from. Marjorie's smirk was gone, replaced by a twitch in her jaw. I had no idea what was coming, but I could feel it, something big, something heavy. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about to blow the whole room open. And then, just as the tension became unbearable, Mr. Bennett looked her dead in the eyes and spoke a single sentence that made several people at our table gasp aloud. Half the room froze. The other half pushed their chairs back in disbelief. And then, as if on cue, people began to rise. Murmurs turned to whispers. Whispers turned to protests. Chairs scraped against the polished floor as relatives gathered their things. Within minutes, nearly half the room had walked out, leaving behind an echo of stunned silence. I sat there, numb, my mind racing, the weight of what I'd just heard pressing down like a stone. And Marjorie, she sat rigid, eyes darting, her face pale as the laughter she once led turned to ashes around her. That was the moment everything changed. But it wasn't the end. Not even close. I couldn't move. My body felt like it was locked in place, even as the air in the reception hall thickened with whispers. Some people still had forks in their hands, hovering halfway to their mouths as though they'd forgotten how to eat. Others looked at Marjorie like she'd just turned into someone they didn't recognize. The words Mr. Bennet had spoken rang in my ears, replaying over and over, each time hitting harder. She's been stealing from her own mother for years. That was it. Simple, direct, but devastating. The gasp that followed was instant. My grandmother, Marjorie's mother, wasn't at the wedding. She'd been too frail to travel, and everyone had just accepted that. But she was still alive, still sharp when she wanted to be, and very much the matriarch of the family. To even suggest Marjorie was taking money from her was unthinkable. And yet, there was Mr. Bennet, standing tall and unflinching, saying it in front of everyone. Marjorie's chair scraped violently against the floor as she stood. "That's a lie," she snapped, her voice trembling just enough to betray her. "How dare you? This is slander." But her eyes told another story. Wide, frantic, searching the faces around her like she was trying to gauge just how much people believed. Mr. Bennet didn't back down. He didn't even raise his voice. "It's not slander when I've seen the bank transfers myself. Do you want me to explain how I came across them? Or would you prefer I bring out the documents tomorrow morning?" You could hear a pin drop. Even the waitstaff had paused, trays wobbling slightly in their hands as they pretended to busy themselves nearby. I glanced at Sarah, my cousin who had laughed at Marjorie's comment earlier. Her smirk was gone. Now she looked sick, like she wanted to meld into her seat. My uncle's face had turned beet red, though whether it was from anger or embarrassment, I couldn't tell. Marjorie shook her head rapidly, her hair swaying with each movement. "You don't know what you're talking about. This is none of your business. None of it." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she slammed her hand down on the table. But the damage was already spreading. From the far end of the table, one of my older cousins muttered, "Wait, is that why Grandma couldn't afford her caretaker last year?" Another voice piped up, sharper. "She told me she had to cancel her physical therapy. Said money was tight. But Grandma's pension is more than enough for her expenses." The whispers turned into pointed questions, murmured accusations darting across the room like sparks catching dry grass. I sat there, still frozen, but my chest was no longer tight with humiliation. Instead, a strange sense of vindication started creeping in, slow and unfamiliar. For once, the spotlight wasn't on me as the outsider, the easy target. It was on Marjorie, and she was crumbling. But even as I felt that small flicker of relief, I couldn't ignore the unease. If what Mr. Bennet said was true, if Marjorie had been draining Grandma's savings, how long had it been happening? And why would he, of all people, know about it? Marjorie's voice rose again, shrill now, desperate. "This is a wedding. You're ruining my nephew's wedding with these lies." She jabbed a finger toward Mr. Bennet. "You're just trying to turn this family against me because you." "Because I what?" Mr. Bennet cut in, his tone suddenly sharp enough to slice through her words. "Because I had the decency to protect an old woman when no one else bothered to check on her. Your mother trusted you, Marjorie. She trusted you with her accounts, her power of attorney. And you've been bleeding her dry for years." The color drained from Marjorie's face completely. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out this time. I glanced at Daniel, the groom. His smile was long gone, his hands gripping the edge of the table. His new wife looked at him nervously, whispering something in his ear. This wasn't just a wedding anymore. It had turned into a tribunal. Then, as if the weight of it all had suddenly hit them at once, people began standing. Not quietly, not discreetly. They stood with anger in their movements, chairs scraping loudly as though to punctuate the betrayal. My cousin Amelia shook her head and muttered, "I can't even look at you." She walked out, dragging her husband with her. A cluster of others followed, whispering furiously as they left. Marjorie's eyes darted to me then, just for a second, and in that second, I saw something I'd never seen before: fear. Genuine, bone-deep fear. And that's when it hit me. All those years of jabs, of undermining me, of treating me like I was beneath everyone else. It wasn't just cruelty for its own sake. It was projection. She had been hiding something, building a wall of insults to distract from the cracks in her own life. And now, that wall was coming down brick by brick. But the night wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Mr. Bennett wasn't finished. He had set the fire, but I could see it in his eyes. He was about to pour gasoline on it. He leaned forward slightly, voice steady, and said, "Shall I tell them where the money really went, Marjorie? Or would you like to explain it yourself?" The room froze again, every eye turning back to her. And I sat there, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. Because whatever was about to come next wasn't just going to shake her world, it was going to change mine, too. Marjorie's lips trembled as though she wanted to speak, but no words came out. Her eyes darted from one side of the room to the other, searching for an ally, someone, anyone, who would step in and deflect the heat away from her. But the faces that had once laughed at her cruel jokes about me were now cold, rigid, and filled with suspicion. Mr. Bennett stood still, a pillar of control in the chaos he had unleashed. He didn't shout, he didn't flail, he simply waited. That quiet patience seemed to make the air even heavier, pressing down on everyone in the hall. People wanted answers. They weren't going to leave without them. Finally, Marjorie's brother, my Uncle Raymond, cleared his throat. His voice was hesitant, but it carried. "Marjorie, is this true? Did you take from Mom?" That single question seemed to crush her. Her shoulders slumped, but she quickly forced them back up again, like a puppet jerking on strings. "Of course not," she barked. "This is all nonsense. Lies. You think I would ever steal from my own mother?" But then Mr. Bennett leaned forward slightly, resting his hand on the back of the nearest chair. "Then perhaps you'd like me to explain the wire transfers. The ones to that account in your name in Palm Beach. Transfers that match the exact withdrawals from your mother's savings." The words hit like thunder. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the clink of a dropped fork somewhere in the back. Palm Beach. It was so specific, so concrete. It couldn't have been fabricated on the spot. Everyone knew Marjorie vacationed in Florida regularly, always posting pictures of beachside condos, expensive dinners, and luxury boutiques. She had always brushed it off as just treating myself, claiming she worked hard enough to deserve it. But now, the picture painted itself too clearly. Sarah, who had been trying to stay quiet since her earlier smirk, suddenly hissed. "That's where you got the money for that car, isn't it? The one you said was a gift from a friend." Her voice was sharp, cutting through the room like glass. Marjorie's face went pale. "Sarah, you don't understand." "No, I understand perfectly," Sarah snapped, rising from her chair. "You've been bleeding Grandma dry while we've been covering her bills. Do you know how much I've put on my credit card to make sure she had what she needed?" The room erupted with murmurs again, angrier this time. No longer whispers of curiosity, but sharp accusations tumbling over one another. I sat still, almost detached, like I was watching a storm sweep through the hall. For years I had been the target of their disdain, but tonight, it wasn't me under the microscope. It was her. The woman who had made my life miserable at every family gathering was unraveling in front of everyone, thread by thread. And yet, even as I watched, I couldn't help but feel a complicated twist in my chest. A part of me wanted to revel in it, to enjoy the poetic justice. But another part whispered that I was now sitting in the middle of something that would splinter the family for good. Mr. Bennett didn't let up. "Would you like me to explain what you told the real estate agent when you bought that condo? Or should I repeat the line you used? Family money, inheritance in advance." Marjorie's eyes widened, and she stumbled back a step. You have no right." The groom, Daniel, finally stood up, his face pale but his voice firm. "Aunt Marjorie, is it true? Did you use Grandma's money to buy property?" The words came from him like a final nail. Because Daniel was her golden child, the one she always held up as a shining example, the one she never failed to compare me against. For him to ask, to demand the truth, cut deeper than any stranger's judgment could. Marjorie opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked cornered, desperate, like a fox caught in a snare. Her hands trembled at her sides, her carefully composed facade slipping into fragments. And then Mr. Bennett delivered the blow. Calm, precise, devastating. She took over $200,000 from her mother's accounts. I've seen the documents. And unless she wants me to provide them here and now, I suggest she stop pretending this is anything other than what it is. The reaction was immediate. Gasps, angry shouts, people rising from their chairs. Half the room surged with indignation, while the other half simply sat in stunned silence, as though the ground had shifted beneath their feet. I could barely breathe. 200,000. My grandmother's money. Money she had likely trusted Marjorie to manage for her care and well-being. And suddenly, I remembered, last Thanksgiving, when Grandma had mentioned she couldn't afford a certain medical treatment. I had brushed it off as exaggeration, assuming maybe insurance hadn't covered it. But now it all made sense. Marjorie's face twisted with fury. "You don't know what you're talking about," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You're trying to ruin me, to humiliate me on this night." But no one was buying it anymore. The air had shifted. The respect she had commanded through fear and manipulation was gone, replaced by contempt. And then she did something none of us expected. Her eyes snapped to me. "This is your fault," she spat, pointing a trembling finger in my direction. "You've always wanted to tear me down. You put him up to this." The accusation hit me like a slap. I blinked, stunned, as dozens of eyes turned toward me. For a moment, the humiliation I thought I'd escaped came rushing back. My throat tightened, and heat rushed to my face. But before I could even open my mouth, Mr. Bennett spoke again, his voice like steel. "Don't drag him into this, Marjorie. He's got nothing to do with your choices. This is all on you." And in that moment, the divide in the family widened into a chasm. Some stood, angry and disgusted, heading toward the exit. Others stayed rooted in place, their faces pale with shock. The wedding had stopped being a celebration. It had become a reckoning. And I realized this was only the beginning. Because if Mr. Bennett had exposed this much already, there had to be more. Much more. When Marjorie pointed her finger at me and accused me of setting this up, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. For a split second, I thought maybe people would believe her, that after all these years of being the family scapegoat, I would once again take the fall for something I had no part in. My heart hammered in my chest. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, weighing, judging, waiting. But then Mr. Bennett's words cut through the tension like a knife. "No, Marjorie. He had nothing to do with this. Stop deflecting. This is about you and only you." The certainty in his tone pulled the spotlight right back onto her. The finger she had jabbed in my direction trembled, then dropped slowly back to her side. Her lips twisted into something between a sneer and a grimace, but she didn't dare push the lie any further. She knew the tide had turned, and it was crashing down on her. My cousin Sarah, her voice sharp with fury, stood up again. "Do you have any idea how betrayed we feel right now? Grandma trusted you. We all trusted you." She was shaking with anger, tears brimming in her eyes. "I've been putting my own money toward her medical bills. And all that time, you were living it up in Florida?" The words seemed to ignite the room. One after another, voices rose in anger. My uncle Raymond shouted, "You always acted holier than thou, but look at you now." Someone else muttered loudly, "Thief." Marjorie tried to yell over them, but her voice cracked, growing shrill and panicked. "You don't understand. I needed it. I deserved it after everything I've done for this family." That sentence landed like a slap. Needed it? Deserved it? The family she had spent years belittling and controlling. The same family who had bent over backward to keep Grandma comfortable. This was her justification? Daniel, the groom, slammed his hands down on the table, the sound echoing through the hall. His face was pale with fury. "Enough. Aunt Marjorie, you ruined my wedding. Do you even realize what you've done? This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and now it's nothing but a spectacle because of your lies." His voice cracked, and you could tell the betrayal hit him harder than anyone else. He had always been her favorite, her prized nephew, the one she bragged about endlessly. Now even he had turned against her. Marjorie's eyes widened, and for the first time, she seemed to falter. Her golden boy had spoken, and it wasn't in her defense. Mr. Bennett, calm as ever, took a step forward. "Daniel, I'm sorry your day was interrupted, but this needed to come out. People needed to know. And if I hadn't said it tonight, how much longer would your grandmother have suffered in silence?" No one spoke against him. Not one person. Marjorie collapsed back into her chair, her hands shaking. The image of control she had always cultivated, flawless hair, perfect makeup, smug smile was shattered. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. That's when Raymond pulled out his phone. He scrolled for a second, then looked up with a grim expression. I'm calling Mom. She deserves to know what's going on right now. Marjorie's head shot up. No, don't you dare. But it was too late. He put the phone on speaker, and after a few rings, my grandmother's frail but steady voice filled the room. Hello, Mom, Raymond said, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. Did you give Marjorie permission to take money from your accounts? To use your savings for herself? There was silence on the other end. Then, softly, no. I trusted her to help me with bills. Not, not this. The weight of that admission was crushing. My grandmother's voice cracked, full of sorrow. Marjorie, how could you? Tears welled up in Marjorie's eyes, and for a moment, I thought she might finally admit it. But instead, she doubled down, her voice shrill and desperate. I did it for us. For the family. You wouldn't understand. None of you ever understand what I've sacrificed. The room exploded. Voices shouting, accusations flying. Half the guests stormed out in disgust, muttering about calling the police, about cutting ties, about how they would never forgive her. The other half stayed, too stunned to move, as if rooted to their chairs by the sheer shock of it all. I just sat there, numb, watching it unfold. All those years of being the target of her scorn, the outsider mocked and belittled, it had all led to this moment. And yet, instead of triumph, I felt something heavier. Sadness, maybe, or the recognition that nothing would ever be the same again. The night unraveled quickly after that. The DJ cut the music. The waitstaff exchanged nervous glances as they continued to serve plates to tables now half empty. Daniel tried to salvage what was left, but you could see it in his eyes. His wedding day had been ruined. Not by chance, not by circumstance, but by the actions of someone he had once admired. As for Marjorie, she fled. She stormed out of the hall, her heels clicking furiously against the polished floor, her shoulders rigid. No one followed her, not even her husband. The rest of us sat in silence for a long while. Eventually, people began to trickle out, one by one, still muttering in disbelief. By the end of the night, only a small circle remained. Daniel and his bride, Sarah, Uncle Raymond, and me. We sat together, the weight of everything pressing down on us. Finally, Sarah turned to me. Lucas, she said quietly, I'm sorry. I frowned. For what? For laughing earlier. For not taking you seriously. For letting her get away with it for so long. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You didn't deserve any of it. None of us did. I swallowed hard, unable to find words. Mr. Bennett approached then, his expression heavy but resolute. I'll be filing the paperwork tomorrow. The authorities will handle the rest. Your grandmother will be protected. He placed a hand on my shoulder. And as for you, Lucas, don't ever let people like her make you think you don't belong. Tonight proved you do. In the days that followed, the fallout was swift. Marjorie's accounts were frozen. Legal proceedings began almost immediately, spearheaded by Raymond and backed by nearly everyone else in the family. Grandma's care was secured, her finances placed in safer hands. And Marjorie? She became a ghost. No one heard from her for weeks, until word spread that she had fled Florida, trying to sell off the condo before it was seized. But it was too late. The law caught up with her. For me, the strangest part was how the family's treatment of me shifted overnight. People who had once dismissed me suddenly wanted to talk, to apologize, to include me. It was awkward at first. I wasn't used to being respected by them. But slowly, I began to accept it. And yet, I'll never forget that night. The night my aunt pointed at me, sneered that I would never be respected, and laughed with half the family behind her. The night that same family walked out on her instead. Because in the end, respect isn't something you demand by tearing others down. It's something you earn by how you live. And Marjorie had lost it all. My name's Jason, I'm 25, and if I'm being honest, I've never been the golden child in my family. That spot has always belonged to my younger sister, Emily. She's smart, outgoing, and knows how to win people over instantly. Growing up, it was obvious she was the favorite. At family dinners, my parents bragged about her grades, her awards, her friends, while I was the quiet one in the corner who had potential, but just didn't apply himself. It stung, but I learned to live with it. I poured myself into things no one in my family cared about, like starting a small business online, teaching myself skills, and building something of my own. They didn't really ask about it, so I didn't really talk about it. That brings me to the night of Emily's graduation party. The whole extended family was crammed into this rented hall, decorated with streamers, flowers, and photos of Emily from kindergarten all the way up to her senior year of college. I'll admit, she looked happy, radiant even, and she deserved recognition for finishing strong. But the way my family handled it, well, that's what burned. I was sitting quietly at a table near the back, just trying to blend in, when my Uncle Greg, loud, opinionated, and always looking for a spotlight, raised his glass and shouted, "Finally, someone in this family worth celebrating." The room erupted in laughter. People clinked their glasses, chuckled, even nodded. My dad smirked, and my mom didn't correct him. And me? I just sat there, silent, my face burning. It wasn't even the first time Greg had taken a jab at me. He'd made comments for years about me being the quiet one who'd probably live in his mom's basement forever. But this time, surrounded by the whole family, with everyone laughing at my expense, it cut deeper than usual. I forced a smile, even laughed weakly along with the others, but inside, I was spiraling. My thoughts were a storm. Anger, humiliation, and something else, resolve. For the first time, I didn't just want to swallow it down. I wanted them to know they weren't looking at the whole picture. They saw Emily's public victories, sure, but none of them knew what I'd been quietly building, step by step, while they brushed me aside. The night dragged on with speeches, toasts, and music. Cousins danced, a slideshow played, and I sat at my table, pretending to check my phone, running through what I might do. Part of me told myself not to ruin her night. This was Emily's moment, not mine. But another part of me, the part that had been silenced and mocked for years, kept whispering, "When is it your moment, Jason? When do you get to show them you're not who they think you are?" The tension inside me only grew worse when my dad got up to speak. He cleared his throat and said, "Emily, we're so proud of you. You've accomplished more in 4 years than some people." And here he glanced right at me. Manage in a lifetime. People chuckled again. My chest tightened so hard I thought I'd snap right there. My own father, the man who knew how hard I'd been working, even if he didn't understand it. I gripped my chair so tightly my knuckles went white. And then came the final straw. Emily, sweet as she usually was, decided to take a little jab too. During her speech, she said, "Thank you all for coming to celebrate me. I know not everyone here has something to celebrate, but I'm glad you came anyway." She smirked slightly in my direction. A small dig, maybe even meant as a joke, but to me it was the culmination of years of being dismissed. The laughter that followed was the last push I needed. I stood up slowly, heart hammering in my chest, and walked toward the stage. My cousins raised their eyebrows, and a few aunts whispered to each other. The DJ, clearly confused, lowered the music. I picked up the microphone Emily had just set down. First off, I began, my voice shaking at first but growing stronger. "Congratulations, Emily. You've worked hard, and you deserve this celebration." People nodded politely, waiting for me to step aside. But I didn't. Instead, I paused, scanning the room. All those faces, many smirking, many dismissive, suddenly looked uneasy. "But since we're all here, I want to share something." I continued, steadying my breath. For years, I've sat quietly while jokes were made at my expense. I've been called a failure, the one who never measured up, the one with nothing to celebrate. And I've let you believe that. I let you laugh, let you look down on me, because I thought maybe it wasn't worth correcting you. But tonight, since we're talking about accomplishments, I think it's time you all know the truth. The room fell silent. No clinking glasses, no whispering, just the soft hum of the air conditioning and every eye locked on me. And that's when I dropped the first hint, the spark that I knew would set the whole hall on fire. I leaned closer to the microphone, lowered my voice so they had to really listen, and said, "I've been keeping something from you. Something big. And after tonight, none of you will ever look at me the same way again." The silence deepened. My Uncle Greg actually set his glass down, his smirk faltering. My mom shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Emily blinked at me, clearly caught off guard. I smiled faintly, a mix of nerves and satisfaction, and added, "You want someone in this family worth celebrating? Well, maybe you should have been paying closer attention." I could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on me as I stood there holding the microphone. My palms were damp, but my voice had steadied. I wasn't backing down this time. For years, I'd been the quiet shadow in the room. But at that moment, Every pair of eyes was on me, and I wasn't going to waste it. I've been working on something, I said, pacing slowly across the stage. Not school, not sports, not the things you all usually clap for. While you were laughing at me, calling me the disappointment, I was building. Nights when you thought I was wasting time in my room, I was teaching myself how to run a business. Days when you assumed I was unemployed, I was actually making connections. And while you've been treating me like I had nothing going on, I've been creating something bigger than any of you realize. There were whispers now. My Aunt Linda tilted her head, clearly skeptical. Greg crossed his arms, smirking again, like he was just waiting for me to embarrass myself further. Emily shifted uncomfortably, tugging at her dress. She clearly hadn't expected her little jab to ignite this kind of storm. I kept going, my voice gaining strength with every word. I've kept quiet because I didn't think I owed anyone here an explanation. But tonight, after hearing the same jokes, the same dismissive comments, I think it's time. Because whether you like it or not, I've outgrown being the family punchline. My dad chuckled under his breath. Not loudly, but enough that I heard it. That one sound lit me up inside. It was like he was saying, "Here goes Jason again, trying to make himself look important." I gripped the microphone tighter and looked straight at him. "You always told me I wouldn't amount to anything," I said, my tone sharper now. "That I'd never measure up to Emily. You made it a family sport to compare us. Well, here's the truth, Dad. While Emily was finishing school, and again, congrats to her, I was working behind the scenes. And as of last month, my company hit its first million in revenue." Gasps broke out across the hall. A fork clattered onto a plate. Someone muttered, "What?" My mom's hand flew to her mouth. My cousin's eyes widened like they'd just been told Santa Claus was real again. Uncle Greg, though, laughed. Not the kind of laugh that comes from amusement, but one laced with disbelief. "A million? What? Selling video games in your basement?" he sneered. A few chuckles echoed around him, but not many. The tone in the room had shifted. There was tension now. Doubt, yes, but also curiosity. I didn't flinch. I'd expected the pushback. "Not video games, Greg. An online store. Products I researched, imported, marketed, and sold. I worked every single night when everyone else was sleeping. I learned how to design, advertise, and negotiate. And now, I employ 6 people. Real jobs. Real paychecks. I have contracts lined up for next year worth more than you've probably earned in the last 5. That last line landed harder than I expected. Greg's smirk wavered, and he glanced around, as if searching for someone to back him up. No one did. The energy in the room was changing. Some faces still skeptical, but others watching me with a new kind of focus. Emily looked at me, her expression complicated. Pride? Jealousy? Maybe both. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but nothing came out. I wasn't done. "You all laughed at me for years, and I let you. I let you call me the disappointment because I thought proving you wrong wasn't worth it. But now, standing here, I realize something. It's not just about me. It's about the way you treat people who don't fit your mold. The way you decide who's worthy of respect and who isn't. And I'm telling you right now, you've been wrong about me." The silence was thick, almost suffocating. My heart pounded, but instead of shame, I felt a rush of clarity. Then my dad stood up. Slowly, deliberately. His face was unreadable, which somehow made it worse. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and said, "Jason, if this is true, then why haven't we heard about it before? Why keep it a secret unless you're making it up?" There it was. The challenge. The same doubt he'd cast over me since I was a teenager. And I knew this was the moment everything could turn. I met his gaze, steady and unblinking. "Because I didn't think you deserved to know," I said quietly. The room gasped again. My mother whispered my name, horrified. Emily covered her mouth. Greg muttered something under his breath. And before anyone could respond, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope I had debated bringing all night. Inside were copies of the business articles that had just been published about my company, complete with photos of me, the logo, the revenue figures. I'd printed them out not because I planned to use them, but as a reminder to myself of how far I'd come. I held the envelope up. "But since you're all so quick to laugh, maybe it's time you see the proof." I walked toward the center of the hall, the envelope in my hand, the entire family watching me with wide eyes. My father's face had gone pale, my uncle's smirk was gone, and Emily looked like she didn't know whether to hug me or cry. I stopped in the middle of the room, about to open the envelope and show everyone exactly what I'd been hiding. The tension was electric. Some people leaned forward, others whispered, and I could feel the weight of every ounce of doubt and ridicule I'd carried my whole life about to explode. And just as I started to pull the papers free, someone's voice rang out from the back of the hall. "Jason, wait." The entire room turned toward the voice. It was my grandfather's voice. Strong, clear, cutting through the noise like a bell. Everyone turned in unison toward the back of the hall, where he was slowly rising from his chair. My grandfather, Robert, wasn't the type to involve himself in family squabbles. He was a retired engineer, quiet, observant, always the one who sat silently at gatherings and only spoke when something truly mattered. Which is why the moment he stood up, the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. "Jason," he said again, his eyes fixed on me. "Before you show those papers, I need to say something." The envelope trembled slightly in my hand. My chest tightened. My grandfather never interrupted anyone, especially not at an event like this. Part of me wanted to wave him off, to finally claim my moment without interference. But another part of me knew his words carried weight in this family. When Robert spoke, people listened. I lowered the envelope just a little, still clutching it. "What is it, Grandpa?" My voice was steady, but inside I was tense. He walked slowly toward me, the shuffle of his shoes on the polished floor echoing in the silence. The room felt frozen in time. Cousins leaning forward, Emily biting her lip, my Uncle Greg with his arms still crossed, though his expression had slipped into unease. My father shifted impatiently, clearly not wanting the spotlight to drift away from his line of questioning. Grandpa stopped a few feet from me, his hand resting lightly on the back of a chair. He studied me for a long moment before turning his gaze to the rest of the family. "All of you," he began, his voice calm but firm, "have made Jason into your target for years. I've sat back, listened to your little jokes, your comparisons, your so-called harmless teasing. And I've watched this boy, this man, say nothing. Do you think that means he was weak? That he was failing? No, he was building." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. My mom's hand fell from her mouth. Emily's eyes widened. Grandpa straightened, his voice growing stronger. I knew. I knew what Jason was working on. He came to me 3 years ago when he was first starting. He asked me for advice, not money, not handouts, advice. He showed me his plans, his spreadsheets, his vision. And I told him then what I'll tell you now. It was brilliant. The hall erupted into hushed whispers. I felt my heart hammer in my chest as Grandpa continued. "Jason didn't keep it a secret because he was ashamed. He kept it a secret because he knew most of you would do exactly what you've always done: mock him, belittle him, dismiss him." And I agreed with him. Better to let his work speak for itself. "And now," he said, gesturing toward the envelope in my hand, "it's ready to do just that." The room was silent again, but the energy had changed completely. My Uncle Greg looked visibly uncomfortable, his smugness slipping into something more like defensiveness. My father's face was tight, his jaw clenched. My mother was fidgeting with her necklace, clearly overwhelmed. And me? My throat tightened, not from nerves this time, but from something closer to relief. For years I'd carried this alone. Now, with my grandfather standing there, I felt like the weight had shifted. It wasn't just me against the room anymore. I opened my mouth to speak, but my dad cut in, his voice sharper than before. "Dad, this is ridiculous. You're taking Jason's side without proof. Anyone can make claims. A business, $1 million. Where's the evidence?" He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "Go on, Jason. Show us this proof. Let's see if it's real." The challenge hung heavy in the air. My fingers tightened on the envelope. This was it. The moment everything could collapse or finally snap into place. I slowly pulled out the papers, the glossy print of the magazine article catching the light. Headlines with my company's name, photos of me standing beside shelves of products, charts showing growth. Gasps and murmurs swept through the hall as I held them up. But before I could pass them around, Greg suddenly barked. "So what if he got lucky one year? Businesses fail all the time. Let's not pretend this makes him some kind of hero. Emily earned her degree the right way. That's something no one can take from her." All eyes flicked back to me. The skepticism was creeping back in, clawing its way into the room. Greg's voice had always carried influence, and I knew if I didn't handle this carefully, the tide could turn again. I looked at him calmly, then at the rest of the family, and said, It's not luck. And it's not just 1 year. What I've built isn't just about money. It's about proving that I wasn't the failure you all made me out to be. And if you want more proof than this, I have plenty. I slid another sheet out of the envelope. This one wasn't a magazine article. It was something else entirely. Something even I hadn't been sure I'd show tonight. The hall leaned in closer, straining to see what it was. And just as I lifted it into view, Emily suddenly stepped forward and grabbed my wrist. "Jason, stop," she whispered urgently, her voice trembling. The entire hall froze. My sister, who'd always been the golden child, who'd let the jokes about me slide, who'd even joined in herself, was suddenly standing beside me, her hand on my arm, her face pale. "Don't show them that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I stared at her, stunned. The family began buzzing again, the whispers growing louder, the tension breaking into confusion. My dad's eyes narrowed. My uncle leaned forward. My mom looked between us like she'd seen a ghost. And in that moment, I realized something. Emily knew exactly what I was about to reveal. I looked down at Emily's hand clutching my wrist. Her fingers were trembling, and her usually confident expression was cracked with panic. It was the first time in years I'd seen her unsettled, the first time she didn't look like the untouchable golden child. The whispers around us grew louder, overlapping like a rising tide. People were leaning in, craning their necks to catch every flicker of movement. My dad was glaring. Greg was shifting in his seat with an annoyed scowl, and my mom just looked bewildered. "Jason," Emily whispered again, but louder this time. "Please, don't show them." The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. My stomach knotted. Why would she say that unless she knew exactly what I had in my hand? And more importantly, why was she so desperate to stop me? I pulled my wrist gently but firmly from her grasp, my eyes never leaving hers. "Emily," I said, my voice low but carrying through the silent room. "Why are you so afraid of what's in here?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. Her face flushed red, and she looked at the floor. That was all the confirmation I needed. I turned back to the crowd and held up the second document. It wasn't another article or growth chart. It was a contract, a signed partnership agreement between my company and a major corporation, one that everyone in the room would recognize. Their logo was splashed across the top in bold blue letters. It wasn't just some little business milestone. It was a deal that placed me firmly on the map. Gasps rippled through the hall. My uncle's smug expression collapsed into disbelief. My mother clutched her necklace tighter. My father blinked rapidly, his jaw clenching. And Emily, my sister who had just been the star of the night, looked like she might faint. I took a deep breath. "This," I said, holding the contract high, "is proof that what I've built isn't just luck or temporary success. It's recognition from a company all of you know, with a deal that guarantees millions in revenue over the next few years." I wasn't going to show this tonight. I didn't want to overshadow Emily's graduation. But since you've spent the entire evening laughing at me, mocking me, and treating me like I don't belong, I think it's time you all understand that I am not the failure you've made me out to be. The room erupted in a cacophony of voices. Some people gasped in admiration, others whispered frantically to their neighbors, and a few clapped hesitantly. My uncle Greg muttered, "This can't be real," but his voice lacked conviction. My father stayed seated, his face hard, but his silence spoke louder than anything. I turned back to Emily. "You knew about this, didn't you?" I asked, my tone sharp. Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded faintly. The room went dead silent again. "Explain," I demanded. She swallowed hard, her voice breaking as she spoke. I found out a few weeks ago. I overheard Mom talking about it with Grandpa. I didn't tell anyone because," she glanced nervously at the crowd, then back at me, "because I was afraid you'd take this moment away from me." The words hit me like a blow, but they made sense. My own sister, who had always basked in the spotlight, had known the truth about my success and said nothing. Worse, she'd still taken a shot at me in her speech, fully aware of what I'd achieved. I shook my head slowly. "You let them laugh at me, even knowing the truth? You let Dad keep mocking me, knowing I'd already accomplished more than he ever dreamed? And then you had the nerve to stand here and take another jab at me in front of everyone." Emily's tears spilled over, and she whispered, "I didn't mean it like that." But the damage was done. I turned back to the family, my chest burning with a mixture of anger and triumph. "You all wanted someone in this family worth celebrating? You've been looking in the wrong direction. While you were worshiping degrees and dismissing me, I was building a future. And now, that future is here. I don't need your approval. I don't need your applause. But I won't sit in silence while you treat me like I'm nothing. For the first time in my life, the room was mine. Every eye was on me, not in pity or mockery, but in stunned silence. The tables had turned completely. And then, my grandfather stepped forward again, placing a hand gently on my shoulder. Jason, he said softly, but loud enough for all to hear. You've done what no one else here had the courage to do. You believed in yourself when no one else would. That is worth more than any degree or toast. Tonight, they should be raising their glasses to you too. The words landed like a hammer. A few relatives actually began clapping, hesitant at first, then stronger. My cousins started nodding, their faces lighting up with admiration. My mom looked conflicted, caught between pride and guilt. My dad, however, stayed frozen, his face tight with suppressed anger. Uncle Greg scoffed loudly, standing up. All right, enough. He's just trying to steal the spotlight. This is Emily's night, not his. But this time, no one laughed with him. No one nodded. His words fell flat. I looked him square in the eye and said, I didn't steal anything. I earned it. The only thing I'm taking tonight is my voice back. The room applauded again, louder this time. Greg sat down, his face red. My father looked like he wanted to argue, but he knew he'd lost the crowd. Emily just stood there, tears streaking her face, caught between shame and something that looked like regret. I lowered the microphone slowly, the adrenaline still coursing through me. For the first time in years, I felt lighter. Not because I'd finally proven them wrong, but because I'd finally spoken my truth. As I stepped off the stage, my grandfather squeezed my shoulder again and whispered, I'm proud of you, son. I smiled faintly, my chest swelling with something I'd craved for years. Not approval from the whole family, but acknowledgement from someone who had always mattered most. The rest of the night carried on awkwardly. Emily's celebration didn't vanish, but the mood had changed. Conversations shifted, glances followed me, and the air was heavy with unspoken apologies. My dad avoided me, my uncle sulked, and my mother hovered, clearly torn. But none of it mattered anymore. I had taken back my place in this family, not as the failure in the corner, but as someone worth listening to. And as I left the hall later that night, contract still tucked under my arm, I realized something important. Their respect, their laughter, their opinions, they didn't define me anymore. They never had. The only thing that defined me was what I had built with my own two hands. And for the first time in my life, I knew they all finally understood that. That was the night the joke stopped. That was the night I stopped being their punchline. That was the night I became someone worth celebrating.